Greetings, dear audience, cultured and knowledgeable. Welcome to this corner of reality that hurts, but here we serve it to you with plenty of lemon and salt so it burns just as it should. Get comfortable, grab your handkerchief embroidered with the national emblem, and get ready for another dose. Now for some more facts that are here to spoil the sovereignty picnic. It turns out that over there, in the cold and boring Gothenburg, Sweden, a group of gentlemen with a lot of free time and too many PhDs in political science from the famous V-Dem Institute started going over their numbers. And look, what a surprise. They've given us the title we all saw coming, but no one at the presidential palace wants to accept. Mexico is no longer a democracy. Congratulations to everyone. You can now put your voter IDs away in the drawer of memories, along with the hopes that gas will drop to 10 pesos according to these Swedes who surely have neoliberalism for breakfast. Under the leadership of Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico has completed its Kafkaesque metamorphosis to officially become an electoral autocracy. Autocracy what? Translating Swedish to well-being? For those who stayed for yesterday's morning press conference, an electoral autocracy. It's that wonderful system where they let you go vote so you can't say we're a dictatorship, yuck, but where the result is already more cooked than a chipilin tamale. It's that place where power is so concentrated in a single office that even to change the toilet paper in a government office, you need the boss's approval. Well, calling her boss is just a way of saying it. In this case, the report is a little gem of cruelty. Statistically, they analyzed 600 indicators. Yes, you heard right, 600. But we already know what our favorite Cervantific is going to say. Those indicators are neoliberal, conservative, and smell like European perfume. Because of course, in this country, the only statistic that matters is how many times we mention Calderon or Garcia Luna per minute. That's how we find ourselves in the exclusive club of those who flunked. The most humiliating thing about this report isn't being called a dictatorship, it's seeing who's doing better than us. According to V-Dem, countries like India, Peru, Hungary, Serbia, and even Senegal are more democratic than Mexico. Mexico under the transformation. Democracy in Mexico has collapsed, says the report. Boom, straight for the official narrative's jugular. Just imagine democracy. We're in the basement of the Democratic Building, and while we try to explain to Senegal that we have Mexican humanism, they look at us with pity from the first floor. But don't worry, here we have other facts, and if the facts don't match reality, too bad for reality, it's destruction disguised as the people. The Swedish report points out what any citizen with common sense and who doesn't blindly accept their bi-monthly support already suspected. Concentration of power, everything in one person's hands, subjugation of institutions, the INAI, the judiciary, the Supreme Court, the INE, the TRIFE, all the autonomous bodies, all of them going through the guillotine of Republican austerity, destruction of checks and balances. Because who needs someone to tell you no when you have the popular will on your side? It's the perfect plan. They destroy the house, but they convince you that now you live in an open space with natural ventilation. You don't need to be a CIA genius to know the answer from the welfare lady. Will any reporter, eager to be labeled as an adversary, ask about the report from the University of Gothenburg, and then get ready for a trip back in time? And what did those Swedes from '68 say? Since they didn't complain 50 years ago, they can't speak up now. It's just that they're friends of Calderon for sure. Felipe has shares in Swedish universities and secretly sends them tequila and Salinas. The one from '94? The Prian stole more than the universal answer that cures cancer, corruption, and the evil eye. It's the ancient technique of shaking the hornet's nest. If you don't like the news, insult the messenger, pull out a file from 3 decades ago, and finish with a smile like a grinning fool, saying that the people are happy, happy, happy. That's how things are, dear audience, while the world sees us as the neighbor who started boarding up his windows and talking to himself. Here we keep celebrating that there's no more corruption, even though the contracts keep ending up in the same hands as always. Take a deep breath and enjoy your new electoral autocracy. After all, who needs freedom of the press and separation of powers when you have such a beautiful and colorful narrative? Every day at 7 in the morning. At the end of this video column, I'll leave you a video explaining what the Electoral Democracy Index, the VDEM, is and how it works. For those who want to expand their knowledge and have more arguments against the official narrative, keep applauding because the show is just getting started. I'm leaving before they accuse me of being an undercover agent for the Swedish crown. See you on Friday. If they still let us publish something other than an ode to continuity, I'll read your comments.
What does it really mean to live in a democracy? The most common answer is usually, we live in a democracy because we vote. But is it enough to hold regular elections to say that a country is democratic? To answer this question, let's talk about a fundamental concept, electoral democracy, and how it is measured. Through the Electoral Democracy Index, developed by the international project V-Dem. This index allows us to operationalize the concept of electoral democracy, that is, to translate it into measurable variables that help us analyze it empirically. How democratic, in electoral terms, is a society? What is electoral democracy? Electoral or procedural democracy is an essential component of democracy. It is based on the idea that a society is democratic if people have the right to choose their rulers. Through free, fair, and competitive elections, where there is universal suffrage and the principle of one person, one vote is respected. But this minimal definition requires more than just voting. It also implies freedom of expression, association, and press, since without these, real electoral competition isn't possible. That's why the concept of electoral democracy goes beyond the ballot box. It requires an environment that guarantees that elections are authentic, that citizens are informed, that parties compete on equal terms, and that the results are respected. How is this concept operationalized? The VDEM project, Varieties of Democracy, has developed one of the most comprehensive indexes to measure electoral democracy, the Electoral Democracy Index. This index is not based on a single variable, but rather integrates 5 key components. Clean elections evaluates whether elections are free from fraud, manipulation, or coercion. Freedom of association measures whether citizens can organize into parties, unions, or other political organizations without interference or repression. Freedom of expression determines whether people can express their political opinions without fear of retaliation. Access to alternative sources of information examines whether independent media exist and whether citizens have access to different informational perspectives. Autonomy of the electoral administration considers whether the institutions in charge of organizing elections are independent and impartial. These dimensions are translated into observable variables, which are collected through expert assessments, systematized processes, and rigorous validation procedures. Thanks to this tool, it is possible to compare democratic quality between countries, identify setbacks or progress in different contexts, and study how democracy evolves over time. For example, the index has shown that countries like Hungary, India, or Turkey have experienced a gradual decline in the quality of their democracy, despite still holding elections. This is because, although elections continue to be held, fundamental pillars such as freedom of the press, electoral autonomy, or freedom of association have been weakened. The value of the index lies precisely in this, in showing that an electoral democracy is not defined only by the act of voting, but by the environment and society that make it possible for that vote to be free, informed, and meaningful. At the international level, the Electoral Democracy Index shows that, since the late 1980s, the world has experienced a cycle of democratic expansion. The global average rose from 0.41 in 1990 to 0.53 in 2010, reflecting cleaner elections and environments with greater freedoms. However, in the last decade, this trend has slowed down and even reversed, since in 2024 the global average dropped again to around 0.49, which shows a democratic setback of almost 30 years, reaching levels similar to those of 1997. Europe continues to be the leading region with the highest levels, with scores ranging from 0.74 to 0.76 over the last 25 years, although some countries have seen recent declines. Latin America, for its part, reached its peak in 2004 and 2005 with about 0.67, but since then it has dropped to around 0.59 today. A striking case is that of the United States, which, after remaining stable at around 0.87 for 2 decades, has changed since 2016. Its score has steadily declined, and today stands at around 0.84. This situation confirms that the weakening of electoral democracy is not limited to countries with fragile institutions. It has returned more democracy of 75. In the case of Mexico, the Electoral Democracy Index clearly reflects the country's recent history. At the beginning of the 90s, Mexico was at a low level, with a score close to 0.4, which showed a system still marked by uncompetitive practices and limited access to fair elections. With the electoral reforms and the change in political power in the year 2000, the index shows a steady increase and reached a score of up to 0.71. During the first decade of the 21st century, that was the moment of greatest strength for electoral democracy in Mexico, even higher than the Latin American average. However, starting in 2019, the trend changed, dropping from 0.69 to 0.51 in 2024, which represents a 26% decrease in 5 years. This figure places the country below the Latin American regional average, which is 0.59, thus reflecting a significant deterioration compared to the levels reached in previous decades. This means that, although we still have elections, some fundamental pillars of democracy, which go beyond the procedural aspect, have been weakened. In other words, the Mexican experience illustrates that democracy is not guaranteed. It can advance with reforms and citizen participation, but it can also regress when its institutions are eroded. Democracy is not easy, but it is essential if we want to understand it, defend it, and improve it. The case of the V-Dem Electoral Democracy Index shows us that political concepts, when properly operationalized, can become powerful tools for empirical analysis. In political science, theory is not at odds with reality. Theory allows us to better see reality. We need well-constructed theories and well-interpreted data. Because in the end, it's not just about knowing if there are elections, but about knowing how truly democratic a democracy really is.
Remember that you can make your donations via PayPal. You can find the relevant information in the comments section. Thanks to you, this channel remains active. It's very important to subscribe, like, and hit the bell to receive notifications every time there's new content. Thank you.